Excellent, thank you. And it looks like we may have Minda with us now, if you wanna. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm kicking off as usual with a short reflection, if anyone has one. I believe you said you might have one.
I do. I do. It's a vocabulary lesson. At least it was for me. The term is marcescence. Marcescence. Spelled just like it sounds. So Sarah and I were driving from Kenmore into Bothell a couple of times in the last year and noticed, they've done that renovation along 522 and they planted a lot of street trees along the south side of 522 as you come into Bothell there. And I've noticed in December, January that all the leaves were still on the trees. And I remarked to Sarah as we're driving, those trees, it's too bad. Those trees are all died. They're not going to make it. And she said, "Oh no, they're doing fine. Don't worry about them." And I said, "No, I couldn't accept that. So, tree board and Anyway, I'm doing with my news scroll at some point or another, and I come across an article that says why some trees don't drop their leaves. And so it caught my attention. I looked at it, and sure enough, there's something called marcescence, which affects some oaks, beeches, and probably some other trees where they do not drop their leaves. With all the other trees in the fall, they hang on to them. In fact, we were through Bothell last week. All those trees in here in March still have the leaves on them. They're brown, and they're dead leaves. So marcescence is this phenomenon where some trees don't drop their leaves. It's considered to be a survival mechanism, I guess. The tannins in the dead leaves are bitter, and so they're not attractive to some herbivores like deer and other things that might eat those small buds. The new leaf will appear and push off the old one, I guess, and start that process that way. And it's not that even in the same species of trees, there are genetic differences going on, so that some, even in the oak category, would do drop their leaves in the early fall or mid-fall, drop their leaves, and others don't. So there's something going on there with these trees. I hadn't realized that.
It's interesting that
all the leaves all the trees drop their leaves in the fall. It's got to be into the story.
and it's not just like one or two of them that I know which trees you're talking about, it's
Yeah.
several of them. It's
A
all
whole roll.
Yeah.
I wondered the same thing, Mark.
Yeah.
I'm glad you found out about it. I literally thought the wind just didn't blow the leaves off.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's my reflection. Just got me thinking about trees are more involved and curious, I guess, that I had thought.
That's fine. Thank you so much. Do we want to do introductions? We've got a comment from Minda. Transplant shock. Sometimes trees take and it just disappear. Take 3 years before they adapt to the land. Fascinating.
All right.
Do we want to do introductions since we have
We should-
some newer folks and Yancy with us this evening? Who doesn't know most of us, I'm guessing.
So I'm Mark Phillips and just started my second term. And so I'm on the tree board for 3 years now. And was chair for the last year. Probably up then.
Yep, Nancy Bagby, senior planner. Here for a year.
Victoria Kutas and newly appointed chair.
What? Yeah,
Yancy.
Yancy, are you replacing Mark?
No,
Oh,
I am filling in for Elizabeth, who's on vacation.
Gotcha.
So Mark is still here. We've been doing a long hearing, so.
awesome.
Yeah.
Just check on.
Filling in.
I'm Stacy Spain, I'm newly appointed vice chair. And I think I'm finishing the last year of my first term.
I think our term ends next year. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's right.
Hi, Larry Goldman, city council member, liaison. I've been the liaison to the tree board for 4 years.
I'm Kyle Gotti. Linda has her picture there as well. This is my first official meeting as a tree board member. Just starting my term now. I'm happy to be here.
What did Minda say? Did you see the note? She's got laryngitis, and it's gonna
I
have
will-
to communicate through chat.
Go ahead and Minda, UW professor, filmmaker, born in LFP been in LFP for 12 years, a steward for restoration certificate for 2023, and the first year on the tree board, and currently with laryngitis. So we will be the voice for you when you have things in chat.
That's for your hand.
And I'm Doug Sprugel, I guess the oldest member of the tree board, both in years and probably time on the board. I'm a retired forest ecologist at UW.
Thank you so much. Time to look at the agenda.
Well, I move that we adopt the agenda. Open for conversation on that.
I suspect there's a couple of things that, minus a urban forest planner, we may not have much of anything to discuss, namely the KCD updates, but we can leave it on there. And we will see how much we have to say about the topics currently on there.
Can you share the agenda? Put it on screen.
Do you have
No,
the
just-
agenda shareable? I can, it should be in your inbox. I don't think we had any edits since Elizabeth sent it out.
She posted it on the website.
Yeah, you should also be able to get the agenda through the public facing part of the city website. Now, do you have access to Municode? If I say Municode, is that, okay, that's how council members get access, but yeah, the public facing, if you Google like Lake Forest Park agendas, it should be the first thing that pops up.
You are on mute, Doug, so if you would like us to hear what you're saying, you can take yourself off mute. If you would like me to shoot you an email with a link to the agenda, I'm happy to.
I should have emailed it to everyone, but I forgot about that. It's been a while since I ran a meeting.
Well, what else sometime? Well, guess not. When you find it.
Did Elizabeth email it?
Okay, I couldn't find where I was supposed to unmute myself. No, I found it on the email from Elizabeth.
Great. Mark has moved to adopt the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Agenda adopted.
Oh, officially vote.
Oh, right. All in favor?
Aye.
Text. Okay, adopted. Minutes from February. We don't have paper copies with us, but it is in the digital copy that Elizabeth sent out.
I just sent her one correction that I was on Zoom as well. I don't really care if
What was that, Stacy?
I just said that I sent Elizabeth one correction that I was also on Zoom at the last meeting, but.
You were listed as attending, just not
On-
clarified whether you were in person.
Exactly.
Anything else? Someone like to move to approve?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second,
I seconded it.
all in favor?
I.
Excellent. Any opposed? Minutes approved. Looks like we don't have any members of the public with us, so we will jump through to reports and announcements. Would you like to do the honors this time of staffing updates?
Yeah, since Mark Hoffman isn't here to preempt me. Yeah, I'm happy to, well, first sad to announce that Sam Cole, the previous urban forest planner, decided to leave his position to pursue other opportunities. The city had a very fast turnaround and has made an offer to Christy Bishop, who is coming from the city of Issaquah. And so she will be the new urban forest planner. I believe she starts next week. So you should be seeing her at your April meeting. Yeah, that is really fast turnaround for hiring someone. Other announcements, the city is currently in the process with the Lakefront Park. Much of the community development division is involved in this. There's a hearing taking place last week and this week. It's part required hearing on some of the city's permit applications, and it's part a resident has made an appeal regarding the SEPA process, the State Environmental Protection Act process. And so those have been combined into a hearing through the hearing examiner. It's basically it's a judicial or quasi judicial proceeding. And so the hearing examiner will make a decision in the coming weeks as to how the Lakefront Park should move forward. If it needs a full SEPA analysis versus just going through and having some conditions on what is allowed. Also, actually, no, I'll wait till we get to item D. But I think it's on the city council side, not really tree board related, but at our last meeting, we approved a resolution regarding community policing in light of what's been happening around the country. And really, again, not directly impacting the tree board, but just generally looking at our finances. But it's a budget year, but beyond that, it's going to be a tough budget year. So the city's looking at where our finances stand.
Thank you so much. Something I thought of while you were talking.
Yeah, happy to take any questions if you have questions about city council business.
So that hearing that you referred to, the hearing itself is over. It's
Um,
finished.
It was today the last day?
No, it's continued.
It's still going on.
Yeah.
It's
Probably Friday, possibly next.
And yeah, I think the first part, like the routine permit application part, that finished. But now it's the appeal of the SEPA process. So yeah, staff's been working very hard on preparing for the hearing to defend the city's position. I see there's something in the chat. From Minda. No, community policing in the sense that our police department is community centered. That our police department's policies are designed to help the police department be a face of the city, to basically work with the community.
And this was the resolution that was adopted was specifically in response to ICE actions and
That was the catalyst.
responses to potential ICE actions in our community, correct?
Yes, and much of it was restating what our current policy is. For instance, that the police department, both on local and state law, does not collaborate with federal immigration enforcement, and also talking about policies that the police department prioritizes de-escalation. So things like that.
Great, thank you. I remembered what I was going to say. I'm just reporting back. Mark did a fabulous job of presenting our 2025 recap and 2026 work plans to the council. I thought they had some thoughtful questions about how we're approaching the work and what our priorities are. So thank you for presenting those, getting those in front of council.
Did they have any specific feedback or anything worth sharing?
I'm trying to recall. They were complimentary towards our board, and all of us were working on it.
And from the council side, there were no comments about the work plan. There were no like you should add this or you should take this out. No comments on the content of the work plan.
Some questions about, are we thinking about long-term climate impacts as we're thinking about like the tree list? Trying to think, I think there were a couple other questions, but trying to remember what they were.
Yeah. Right, the question was asked, what were we doing to prepare for long-term climate change or something along that deal? I just pointed out that we have in our tree list tried to identify those trees that are more drought resistant. That's one of the additions that we made to the tree list.
Some questions about timing on events and community engagement. So, no like hard hitting questions.
Right.
Yes.
Question for council member, do they often ask about us or is the first time we're on their minds? When we come in person?
I would say, I mean, anytime we're approving a new member of the tree board.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think there's a general sense that you're doing good work. And the council doesn't see a need to micromanage because they're happy with what you're doing, especially engaging with the community, going to events like the Green Fair, the Farmers Market.
Awesome.
Where we end up running into many of our council
Yeah.
members. So I think many of them are aware of some of that outreach we're doing.
Well, you know, and part of the city council's meeting agenda is for council members to give individual reports, and Larry always reports on the last board meeting. That's appropriate. So they do, yes, actually have a sense after what we're doing and the issues we're following.
Sweet. Anything else on council business? Can you pull up Minda's chat one more time? Besides drought resistant trees, what about diseases, pests that will be coming with climate change? Do we have those in consideration on the tree list? Those are things that we have discussed as we've dug into that work. Thinking about, I know the report that was done for the city by a consultant, what was that, 2 years ago? Who was that? Who did the canopy report for us? Includes sections on things like, is it the emerald boring beetle and a couple other anticipated pests and issues, upcoming issues that we may see coming to our region. So it is on our radar.
Yeah, the arborist also, the one prior to Sam.
True.
Thank you. She would also give us insight to pest awareness.
Yes. This time of soil, I don't know.
That might be a question for the Stewardship Foundation to see, because I know
Yeah.
they routinely test the water quality in the creeks. So if someone could ask them if they test for soil health.
One other thing that I wanted to bring for reports and announcements, we got a couple of us got a message this week from council member Rosenau about a state funding update that may impact some of the work we do on the House budget. So the House and Senate budgets for Washington were released on Sunday. The House budget cut all funding for the Department of Natural Resources Urban and Community Forestry Program, which does support for things like community forest management plans and other urban forestry projects around the state, and does a significant amount of like pass-through dollars for federal grants that we're aware of. Lake Forest Park hasn't drawn on funds from that program, at least not recently, but is something that I thought I would bring to the attention of folks in this room. If it is something that we want to do advocacy around, Josh has offered to help coordinate. If you also just want to be aware of it and look it up, KUOW did a piece on it this week that I'm happy to send the link around, or you can Google. And if you feel so moved to tell your senators and representatives to make sure that the Senate budget passes for that, and that the House budget isn't the deciding factor on cutting that funding. So figured I'd bring that to you all if you hadn't heard about it. Yeah.
The timing, the state legislative session ends next Thursday,
Correct.
so a week from tomorrow. So by a week from tomorrow, we should know what the finalized state budget looks like. It has been passed and sent to the governor. Though the governor does have line item veto abilities, and so until Governor Ferguson actually signs the budget. There's always gonna be some ambiguity as to has this been funded, has it been cut? But by the end of the month, definitely, we'll know what the next budget looks like.
Excellent.
Minda's comment about soil testing, and someone mentioned creek testing, there's, our sewage spill in Lions Creek, and I'm just curious. That if anyone knows if that, has been resolved, or the source has been determined of that spill.
Are you referring to the WashDOT culvert project and how there was a sewage overflow? Because I believe that has been fully
Yeah.
repaired.
No,
There was something in addition to that too, I believe, another incident.
We're up there today, there's someone hit a sewer line. Property that creek goes through, and that's been being repaired today.
oh, great, okay.
Which was, I think, a 205th.
Yeah, 37 and 200.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was out there today watching.
Oh, yeah. The stream keepers have done bacteria testing since that first one anyway that was mentioned, and I don't think there was any blip in the bacteria counts for Lion Creek downstream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite the smell of the corner though.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm sure there was a short-term impact.
Yeah, well, tree related, I was just curious if sewage spills like that affect any of our trees. Sure, it's something. Okay.
Doug, did you have something?
Yeah, I've just read Minda's chat from several minutes ago, I think. She was asking about diseases and pests. In the last time we updated the tree list, we did include certainly recommendations against a couple of tree species that we know are going to be subject to pests over time, and other species that there are pests in the area that we know we're going to get here eventually. So we're saying people, please don't plant these trees because in 6 years they will be attacked by some pests. So we have looked into that. But I just realized today that we haven't actually ever adopted that list. Well, that list has never been made public. We finished it off about 15 or 16 months ago, and it's still not on the website. So maybe we can bring that up when we talk about the housekeeping amendments.
Well, I did bring that up, Doug, in the report that I made to the council last week, pointing out that there were those two items that were still pending, and we were looking for an opportunity to move them along.
8E, we will definitely dive more into that. I'm guessing that's another one that may be fairly short, since I'm guessing the main thing will be waiting for a staff member to steward it forward for us. So we'll get into that.
Yeah, there was some question at the time whether we even needed to ask the city council. I mean, this is kind of a professional thing, but if the arborist to do with approval from us, and there's no real reason the city council should care whether we recommend Japanese arborvitae or not. But I think we've felt in the past that maybe we needed to do this for safety's sake. But given how long it's taken to get it done, maybe we should.
Let's dive into it when we get to it on the agenda.
Okay.
Because it's wrapped in with a few other pieces.
I think there might be something in code that talks about, I think we're looking
There
at
is.
the list the other day that says
Yeah.
the arborist.
We can get into it. Last I knew, I believe the code says references a specific list.
Yeah.
Which is why
Right.
we needed to get the code amended so that we could update the list without going to council to get the code. So it's circular. Anything else for reports and announcements? FYI, Doug, your hand is still raised. So I'll either keep calling on you or I'll forget to call on you entirely.
Oh, there we go. Never mind. I found lower hand. Got it.
Okay, moving into old business. One of the main things we wanted to talk about from our last meeting was there was lots of interest in public outreach and bringing it back to discuss how people wanted to engage in public outreach activities, and we also can look at, I see you have at least examples of at least some of our outreach materials there with you, Mark, at least the brochure. Looking at materials, we don't have our outreach bin with us. That is hidden somewhere in storage in this building. So hopefully at a future meeting, we can look at what materials already exist and what other materials we might want for doing outreach. We could also, if a few folks are interested in it and want to have a separate subcommittee activity of assessing some of those things and bringing recommendations back, proceed in that way as well.
Yeah.
Initial thoughts?
Well, I'm thinking meanwhile, we do have several brochures that I guess we probably need to check the quantity that we have available. And I think it will do us well. There's this one called Lake Forest Park Managing Our Community Forest, which talks in very broad terms about our city's interest in the health and welfare of our forest. It has a little section on what the urban forest planner does. And a plug for the local tree board. And it's been one that we've used in the past and it's been pretty helpful. We have another one too, with the other one. Was the other one specifically about the tree board?
We have, so in the box, there's a number of other brochures that are like generic. I don't know where they came from. Some of them look to be rather dated. But about, yes, that one is new. There's a number of other brochures with various tree related topics. I can certainly send around a digital copy after the meeting. I'd have to dig for my file to send it over. So there's a variety, like I said, we can get into the details of like what already exists in that box, either at a future meeting or folks can assess that on the side and bring recommendations back. There's a bunch of kind of generic tree related brochures. That brochure is the most specific Lake Forest Park one. And then there's some materials that have been developed specifically for tabling. So the one you've got there is a recruitment flyer for trying to get folks to join the tree board, which, knock on wood, for the moment, we don't need.
That's right. We don't need to be pushing.
Yes.
How much?
We also have a newly created, so we've never actually used it, interest sheet, so that instead of just telling people go sign up, we could actually collect people's information and be able to follow up proactively with folks who are interested in joining. So if we end up with vacancies again, those are things that we can redeploy. We have got a couple of other flyers and handouts in there with information about the tree walks and QR codes that will take you to the city website to access the tree walks as well. I think that's most of our current materials that we've got in there.
I did not find the box, but I do know that there's a shelf in the back, couple shelves of brochures and other stuff that I don't know if anyone's aware of.
I'm not aware of anything that's not in the box.
Yeah, there's
So.
a whole stacks of brochures.
Okay.
They've not been touched in the year I've been here.
Good to know.
I don't know if you want to see them or I can.
Yeah.
Elizabeth knows where they are too.
Okay.
So if there's something that can be distributed and not be sitting in our office for
Love
years
that.
on the end, then
I did a big cleanup and threw away a bunch of the very outdated
yeah,
brochures
might
from
be-
the box,
yeah, and they
but
might-
who knows what else is
They
there.
weren't in the box. They're not in the box. They're entirely different
Good to know.
stockpile. Maybe some of them are, but I've never seen the box. I don't know. They're actually-
So when does Elizabeth return? And do we just
Next.
next week, so we can call on her to verify what's there?
Yeah, she wants to bring those out.
I'm happy to go down and look at them during the day, if they are there. See if we can.
I've not seen any of the materials. I'll take a look at them. But I'm curious if we have sort of like a list or like a set of priorities for what we're trying to educate the community on, or what information we're trying to convey. Do we have a bank of that somewhere? Or
So I think that's the root of why this is on the agenda today, is figuring out, we've now got a number of folks who are interested in specifically education and outreach, and figuring out what is the best way to tackle figuring out strategy for that. we can discuss it as a whole group here. We, again, if a few people want to come up with a proposal to bring back and say, here's the things that we think we should prioritize in at outreach events, and here's some of the materials or resources we need to do that. It could be tackled outside this space. Thoughts and preferences, other ideas?
There's other questions, there are a lot of questions that you've got. That we should try to answer with our
Yeah.
revised material. So
Well, and how do these questions come in? Just,
they come up to us and the big question is, would you recommend an arborist?
Yeah. I have this concerning tree, what do I do about it?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Or who can I talk to about the code of the big plan too?
yeah,
Sometimes questions come up that we're able to answer, you know.
Yeah.
That we know the answer to what the code says, for example, about a dead tree or an hazardous tree.
we've talked in the past as well, about having materials on better, more targeted materials about tree care. We have folks who like our tree canopy, but are very nervous about the health of trees, either specific trees or our tree canopy in general. And some reminders of like, yes, we're not saying that you should not care for the trees and like take down dead or dangerous trees. We're saying that we should preserve the canopy in general. So some information about like what to look for in disease, when to call an arborist, things like that. We've talked about trying to develop something like that. It gets very nuanced very fast.
right,
Because there's no like, if the tree looks like this, call someone, and if it doesn't, it's fine. But that is, I would say that's one of the most common conversations that I've had at places.
Related, this has come up at council, not just about arborists, but just in general. Should the city, what sort of information should the city have about licensed companies?
Yes.
And so the city is not allowed to say, we recommend company X, but to put a factually neutral statement that the following companies have registered with the city and they're fully licensed.
Yes.
And then you can investigate them as you see fit. So for arborists, for construction firms, really anything that would involve city purview.
Last I knew, we had been talking to Sam about, he had gone through to try to find all of the companies that were licensed with to do work in the city. And we were talking about whether we could make that a publicly available directory. And I don't know where he left that, so that may be something that we chat with Christy about.
And this also might, if there's a more broad push, then it would include arborists by default.
Yeah,
And
would
so
love to see that, it's just yeah.
So I could
Resources.
follow up on the city side to see if there's plans. I mean, my understanding is that all of these licenses are public, so the information is public. It's just how can we get it in a format that is easy for people to understand?
Doug?
A question that's arisen in the past. Yeah, you can hear me. Is if a arborist screws up and takes down a tree that they know perfectly well they're not supposed to be taking down because they're willing to pay a few $1,000s fine to get rid of the tree. Is there anything we can do, like taking away their license to be, operate in Lake Forest Park? We've had this discussion before because frankly, some people think it's worth a $5,000 fine to get a tree out of their yard. Or out of their view, most likely. Anyone?
No, when it's not code enforcement violations, we can stop accepting permits from them. I think. Code enforcement. Look up that code enforcement division. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know if there's a number on that, but. Or if that's ever actually been used.
We've had a couple of occasions where people took down trees and they had professionals do it, where they clearly wasn't legal. They clearly did it because they figured they just pay the fine. And it seems to me that an arborist who does that shouldn't be allowed to work in Lake Forest Park. Which, denying them permits would help, but they can still take the tree down without a permit.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I don't think our code mentions that specifically, does it? It just talks about the fining process, but then it talks about that recourse. But that would be good to.
Might be in violation, section.
Maybe in one of the
Code enforcement section.
yeah.
So just have some follow-up thoughts on the educational materials. I have a list, I won't get into the weeds on it, but I was thinking of looking at some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the, not such big systemic sort of things to communicate, but things like, removal of the English ivy, why and how to mulch your trees appropriately, things that are just little things that homeowners can do, I feel like could be valuable. I've got a couple other ones on here as well, but I think if we could create a list like this of what we want to sort of go after, we could start to chip away at it. I mean, I could take that on and start to chip away at it. And it could be, I envision like a single page flyer or a single image or something that we could share in different ways, whether digitally or tabling.
And some of those things may be addressed in other sources, so it's a matter of, referring people to those sources. I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff about, pruning trees and maintaining trees. And rather than recreating that, we could file them somehow.
Right. Yeah, I think certainly, and that's another place too. Like, I'm not a tree expert, but I could certainly take in some of that information and leverage it or lift it from that other resource and put it together in another digestible format. Different ways of approaching.
We've talked about videos many times in the past and got stumbled on how to execute. So excited to have you here to be able to actually get us over that hurdle, Minda. So in the up until now, or the last couple years with our kind of outreach and communications work, the place that we have direct control is like tabling, and when we are standing face to face with folks, we do have some opportunity to put things in things like the city's e-news, and we have gotten things like event notices up onto the city's social media. We have also put out short articles in things like the Shoreline Area News and other places. I'm trying to remember where else we've put things. Mostly it's been event notices, but we've also done some like educational pieces. I feel like we could, again, either right now create a list, or it sounds like you have a list started. If a couple folks would like to communicate via email and get a list of, here's what we would like to see happen. We would like to do 2 short educational videos and get them out through city social media and pair that with something in the city's e-news and a handout that we can have to direct people back to something, whatever that list looks like. One of the places that there's been ambiguity in the past is what are the city's communication opportunities and how much can we access those, and like what's the cadence. We've tried to do some work trying to get that all mapped out, and I feel like we don't have a super clear reference point at this point of the various communication channels and who controls them, how to get in them. We started mapping it out, I think last summer, was that?
Yeah.
I don't remember where that ended up. So.
And logistically, things like flyers that we need to print, is there some system in place, a process to go about that?
Email them to Elizabeth and they show up at our next meeting, has been the system thus far.
Yeah, another angle on this business is videos. You've spent more time on the tables at our various events than I have, but would it be helpful to have a laptop there with videos on it? Since we've had an offer by a professional filmmaker to make videos, would it be advantageous to have videos, 1-minute videos saying, how to plant a tree that they could click on while they're there, while they're there at the table?
I think at the events, I feel like it's unlikely that folks would stand and watch a video, but I don't know what the city has for, if there is somewhere we could have a short video, a library of short videos hosted for folks to be able to go reference, 2-minute best practices for cutting ivy off trees tutorial, things like that. I don't know what the city's capability for something like that would be.
Well, I think I'm not convinced people wouldn't look at it, because when I talk to my kids, the first thing they want to do is look at a video. They want to Google something and find a video on how to do it. They don't want to read about it. They want to see a video.
Yep.
And I think this is an opportunity, now that we have this opportunity. We should figure out if we can use it, because I'm not convinced that handouts are more effective than videos. I'm not convinced they're less effective, but I'm not convinced they're more effective either. You can take the handouts home with you. I agree.
It depends on where you're talking to people. If you're talking to people face to face, then a conversation with a physical item or directing them to something online.
But presumably any video that we could access in that setting, Doug, would be available on their iPhone. So just, directing them to that source.
That could work too.
What I don't know is, and I've meant to check this, is just that to be sure that we have the capability on the city's website to post short videos. It seems like an obvious thing, but I haven't talked to the people who do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we have a library that we can host them somewhere, having QR codes at any tabling events to say, for all these helpful videos, just scan here and go to the city website and see all these helpful resources.
I can add, the city has a YouTube channel. That's where all of these recordings wind up, all the meeting recordings, things like that. And so that could also be where the videos live, and then they're just linked from the city's website. All that's handled by the clerk's department, and so I think Jessica might be the one in charge of that. Does that sound right to you?
I think so, yeah. I would talk to Jessica.
I wonder, Minda, if you have any contact with the video club over at Shorecrest. I know they do have a club, and it seems to me like it would be an interesting thing to do to try to engage some of the students in working with us or creating that. Creating some of those things. And I bet there would be interest on their part in doing that.
We need to get more engaged with young people regardless. To the schools, it's so great. I think we've mentioned that a million times, like different ways we can engage with schools, but nothing's ever actually done.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if there's a need for it looks like there's a little committee.
There are
Victoria, me, Minda, and Kyle.
a number of us who put our names down on that.
Who are interested in this particular topic. I wonder if there's any possibility of working outside of these meetings together to try to move something like this along.
Larry, you're good at reminding me of the rules. How many of us can work on things?
One less than a quorum. So if you have a committee of 8, then 4.
4 of us.
Yeah,
Our
5.
11 talk.
Yes.
Okay.
Though you would want to be careful, because if there's 4 people on the committee, if a 5th person starts emailing and there's back and forth, that creates what's called a serial meeting, and now that becomes 5.
Okay.
So just make sure that any information either flows through staff or is one direction. You say, do not, here's some information we're going to talk about at our next meeting, or here's a video that we made. Do not reply all to this email.
We've been very bad at that historically.
So there is an area there, it seems to me. I know you've studied this quite carefully. But if 4 people were to get together and brainstorm a list, they're not making a decision about that list, but they are, in a sense, naming this topic by
Yes.
identifying those things.
If it's less than a
As
quorum,
long as
it's
only 4
totally
of us.
fine. So yeah, 4 of you can meet up in Third Place Commons and talk about this as much as you like, and then bring it to the full tree board at the next meeting.
But 5 of us
Any
cannot.
decision that needed to be made, yeah.
Yeah, like where it gets awkward is if 4 of you meet up in Third Place Commons, and then one of you then calls a 5th person and you have a 30-minute phone call. Now it's kind of getting into, well, technically that's kind of a group of 5 at that point. But as long as the 4 of you keep it self-contained.
So
Yeah.
Doug and Stacy, you have to ignore us when you see us sitting in the comments.
Yeah,
over
I walk
coffee.
right well.
Keep walking. Do folks, Kyle, Mark, Minda, do you want to, the 4 of us, does that sound like a reasonable plan to either we can meet up for coffee or we can do it via email and kind of come up with a list. Sounds like you have a starting point for us and go from there. Here's our ideal topics and mechanisms for communication. And assess from there.
I think that would be good. That's
great.
moving along.
Sweet.
It sounds like Saturday, you all have jobs.
I'm self-employed, so I'm
So
flexible.
you got
I can
flexibility. I
Yeah.
got flexibility.
And I'm almost never here on Saturdays, but we'll figure something out.
Okay. Oh, good. I think it would be good to do. Oh, hey, there's some other things, that we have just before we leave the topic.
Yeah.
We got, and just ways in terms of having a conversation with people when they show up at your table and who are you and well, we're the tree board and they're interested in tree. We have these little things we put together, 3 statements, which one is false. That we talk to people about testing or just, exploring the idea of what can and can't, what is true and what's not true. I shared with you, I think, this little thing I was doodling on about 4 common trees, Northwest trees, and it's just so amazing when Dick did that little presentation. Dick put together the stuff for the table at the farmers
He
market.
just showed up at the farmer's market with a bunch of
With a
sticks.
bunch of, yeah,
Yeah, and
and that was great.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
no, it's hard when you don't have the depth of information that he did, but I feel comfortable using something like this to just talk to people about, here's some trees. How many things can you identify, by the way? And then use that as a way to talk, at least about these trees and about other things.
Yeah, we've also done a version of, I forget what our question was, but we had like a big poster board and had people put their answer on a spectrum of some question and stick stickers on the poster board.
Yeah.
I know similar activities to that have gotten a lot of engagement when the Climate Action Committee has hosted tables that at events we've attended. So one of the things we can chat about is what education topics do we want? What are the channels? And what is the best way to get engagement with people when we are talking in person? Are there ideas of things that we could be developing that will be more engaging activity type things, depending on the audience?
Yeah, for example, one was we had on the whiteboard, we had the question, Lake Forest Park's tree regulations are, and then we had a spectrum from too restrictive to about right to not restrictive enough. And we asked people to either put a post-it where they felt how they
Yeah,
felt
little
about that.
star stickers or
Or
something on
stickers,
one.
yeah, little
Yeah.
dots, that kind of thing. There's ways like that, and it's just nice to have some kind of things that you can use to kind of kick off conversations.
Yeah.
Oh, we also have educational coloring sheets for the
Oh, yeah.
picnic in the park for little kids events.
Very popular.
That was very popular.
Yeah.
And the
Candy is most of how we get those talk to us. Doug, did you have something? Then
Yeah, a question for Mark. Mark, is that something you put together or something you copied from somewhere?
Oh, the one I just shared?
The one you sent out earlier in the week.
The identification.
Oh, I put that together, yeah.
So if
I
in
think
Lake Forest Park, big leaf maple is about 5 or 6 times more common than red maple. So if you are able to redo it, putting big leaf maple in instead of red alder, I'm sorry, big leaf maple is about 5 times more common than red alder in Lake Forest Park.
I see a lot of alders, but you're probably right. But
I went back to the survey and looked.
yeah. Well, we can talk about that. There's specific other examples. I was hoping to get, this came from a source called Northwest Conifers, and it should be noted on here if this ever gets used in public. It was just taking some of their photos off and putting together like this.
Yeah.
So they didn't have big leaf maples on that one, but certainly could come up with some counterpart for big leaf maples.
Well, red alder is not a conifer either, but anyway. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, red alder is the second most common tree in Lake Forest Park. I'm sorry, big leaf maple is the second most common tree in Lake Forest Park. And I think it's one of the coolest trees because the leaves are so big.
I know.
Thinking about the that engagement technique, it could also be an opportunity to learn from the community of what people are interested or what questions they have or how they feel about things, which could then inform our work on what we want to provide answers to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. FYI, Doug, hands still raised. So Sweet. So
I
Mark,
think I remember to
Minda,
mute myself.
Mark, Minda, Kyle, and I will coordinate and hopefully come back to the next meeting with some proposals on next steps or plans for communication and outreach. Green Fair. Speaking of outreach, coming up beginning of April, it will be the end of the next week that we meet, I believe.
That's right.
So we will see each other Wednesday, April 1st, and just 3 days later, on the 4th, is going to be Green Fair. So if there are immediate things that we identify, we can bring actual, if there are things that we're like, hey, this is low hanging fruit, let's create this for Green Fair. We can bring drafts back to the group to show anything we want to show at Green Fair. Otherwise, it will be for events later in the year, I'm guessing.
Would there be turnaround time if we meet on that Wednesday and approve it to have printed then? Is that gonna be too tight? By Saturday?
I'm guessing it depends on what we're looking at getting printed. If it's just like, we would like some of these handouts or flyers, often Elizabeth has been able to get that for me within a day or two. So I won't speak to staff capacity and promise anything, but we have often been able to do that.
That's great.
I'm sure.
What's a Green Fair? Where is it? When is it?
It is Saturday, April 4th in the Commons.
And the two.
Yes.
And did we answer Elizabeth or Corey's call for?
Yes, I confirmed with Corey that we would like a table. So we should be confirmed to have one. I am happy to bring, we need to figure out who is working it. I am happy to bring a table. She asked folks to bring a table if they're able to. There'll be limited tables, physical tables in the space for folks to set up on. And then we'll just need to we do have a banner and the outreach box from Elizabeth that I am happy to coordinate getting from her as well.
Great. I think we should just take a quick polling of who's willing to work that in.
Let's figure out who's working it. Let me confirm the hours real fast.
It's
Yeah.
10 to 2.
10 to 2.
It's 10 to 2, because okay.
Okay, so we'll need to do set up beforehand. Cleanup usually only takes about 5 minutes. I am happy to work any or all of the day. I enjoy tabling and I'm free all day. Great. Anybody else dying to talk to the general public?
I'm a possible. I have a conflict that day. It's not on my calendar, but I know my wife mentioned it that first Saturday. But I'm interested.
I'm interested in doing that. So.
Do you want to claim a chunk of the day? Go ahead.
Well,
Mark.
I'd like to work in the afternoon.
Doug in there, yes.
So
So we think like 2-hour shifts is how we've done it before, noon to 2, kind of like that. I don't care. I'll join.
happy birthday to your son, Minda. So Doug will do 12 to 2. Stacy, Mark,
And the 12.
Stacy, I'll do 10 to
What
12.
did she say?
10 to 12.
So you'll do the morning, Doug will do the afternoon.
I can work with Doug in the afternoon.
It's Saturday or something.
It's a Saturday.
I have to take the 12.
You need to do the afternoon.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if there are too many people, I don't have to.
And if you and Doug want to do the afternoon, Mark and I can do the morning. Does that work for you, Mark?
And Richard Saunders has always been interested in doing that stuff, and there's probably a work party going on that morning at 5 Woods.
What I have folks penciled in for is myself and Mark from 10 to 12, Stacy and Doug from 12 to 2, Kyle, if it works out for you, you can come join for any chunk or message and see if anybody wants to trade. I am more than happy to stay for the afternoon if anything comes up and either of you are not able to make the afternoon or we feel like we need a third person. Sometimes the staff has been able to join us. I know Drew joined for a portion of last year's event, and it was really helpful to have her there to answer questions. So that is also something that we can ask Christy. I'm asking them to attend a Saturday event on what I'm guessing will be like week 3, maybe a no-go. But if she is able to join us, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that's good. She may well be interested in doing that, just as a way of starting to meet people.
Connect with the
talk to
community.
people.
So I am happy to follow up with a note to Mark asking him to check on availability. I assume Mark will be, the other Mark will be Christie's supervisor. Great. Since we're working the morning, I will work with Elizabeth to get the materials and all of that, and then Doug or Stacy, whoever's around at the end of the day, can either just send materials back with Drew or get them, bring them to the next tree board meeting and hand them back off. Yep. One of the things that would be amazing to have at the Green Fair is information about our Arbor Day event.
Yes.
So unless any other thoughts on Green Fair specifically before we move on to Arbor Day? Okay. Arbor Day planning. We did hear back from Stewardship Foundation, and they are interested in partnering with us. Their next meeting is the 17th of this month. And said that they would have some more information. I'm trying to find my email from them. I just had it up. Said they would have a better sense for what partnership may look like after they can talk to their full group or a head count for who can participate. What I let them know was in the past, partnership for this has looked like if they want to say a few words, promote anything that work that they're doing, or talk about any updates at the beginning of the event, they are welcome to. And if they're willing to help promote the event and get the word out, we would love support with that. They said they'd be happy to partner, can provide support with representation and speaking, and also pre-event promotion. So we've got at least one partner in this. I believe you were going to talk to a handful of other folks that may want to partner with us.
You remember who I was going to talk to? They're the Stream Keepers, which is really covered by Stewardship Foundation.
I think we talked about, did we talk about the Secret Garden group? And I know I mentioned to Sarah and someone else, we were chatting about the Climate Hub, and mentioned that we would be having this event if there was anything that they would like to do to partner. I know the CAC has officially dissolved the Climate Action Committee, but if the Climate Hub folks have any interest in participating in the event.
You know, it seems to me like there's really not a lot of work to be done with Dig taking the lead on leading that. I mean, those would be good outlets to publicize the event through them. I think
the question is, do any of them want to like speak at the beginning before they go off on the tree law? Do we want, the last time the mayor spoke, there was an update about the Lakefront Park. There was the update from the garden club about the art installation, and just some like thank yous and community updates. So mostly asking, do you have anything you would like to say to a crowd? And will you help us get a crowd?
Yeah, but then I'm remiss in that. I will follow up with the Climate Hub team and with the Rotary Club. And what's the other one you mentioned?
The Secret Gardens folks, the Climate Hub folks, Stewardship we're already talking to. Is there somebody else we've been talking about? And I don't think I wrote it down. Yeah.
Where would you be thinking about having these presentations?
So that is one of the things we need to determine. Did we decide with Dick which walk he was doing? I know we were talking about either one from near Blue Heron or one from here going across. Were we gonna do the one meeting here
I think
and then crossing the street?
So this would be we would start it, I guess, at the front door of City Hall.
Start out front?
And then proceed from there. You know, I think the walk was to go around, not down, not down to the Lion Creek Reserve, but across Ballinger Way to 47th and up a little bit in that neighborhood and around.
I believe so, and then possibly like an optional if folks then want to go down. I think there were a few trees down in the preserve that, but not trying to get the whole group across all the way and then back and then across Ballinger.
I guess the last time I talked about it, I thought it was sort of a kind of an early opening day for the new waterfront park. Does that turn out not to be possible or reasonable?
The last time we talked, Sam said we could not get into the park.
No.
Yep. Which is a bummer. I think that would have been a big draw.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry.
What you gonna say?
Well, we probably a one-page flyer or a half-page sheet that we could use at the Green Fair. Then it would be in order.
Yep.
As well as, it's probably not too early to draft an article. Just get a draft of an article for the shoreline area that's going. And city news flash. I'm happy to work on either of those or both of those. Share it with you, let you see what you think. You've done a lot of that in the past.
I'm happy to do an event flyer, or if
Yeah.
I know you've said you're happy to do materials. We decided 10:30.
Yes.
Is that correct? So 10:30 on Saturday, April 25th. At City Hall. The things I think we need to know for an event flyer are, so we're advertising it as a tree walk to learn more about some of the trees in the neighborhood north of City Hall. And I got my orientation correct, right?
North and east.
Northeast of City Hall. And if we can have on the flyer any partner, so if there's anyone here, updates on work happening in the city from the Stewardship Foundation and ... anyone else. Richard Saunders is in the email with Ashton with me. He's the one who initiated that. If we can communicate via email and potentially get anyone who's interested in collaborating on an email chain to say, hey, let us know if you want to speak about anything, if you want to be listed on the flyer as a partner for hosting this event, and how much time you would like to speak, if you would like to speak. Feel like we can accomplish that together, Mark?
I think so.
Sweet.
So what did I hear? I heard that you're going to draft an announcement piece so we can use at the Green Fair.
Either Kyle or I can do
Okay.
an event flyer. And then you and I will collaborate on an email to event partners to figure out like who needs to be listed on that flyer.
Okay.
And communicate with any partners. And then would you mind doing the city news flash part once we have all of this locked in?
Yeah. That's 2 weeks.
Perfect. Once we have a flyer, we've also done things like, we'll send that obviously to our partners, and we've like posted it around the town center on the board in the commons, and a lot of the businesses will let us put up flyers as well, like that. So we'll do that probably between the Green Fair and the Arbor Day event. Get those all over town. Thanks. Other outstanding questions, thoughts, or comments on Arbor Day?
Well, it's probably.
It is Saturday the 25th, yes.
It's probably a good idea to shoot Dick a note and just say, we talked about this again
Yes.
at glad you're on board and don't forget about it, stuff like that.
Absolutely.
And it should, if he recalls the time when we started.
I would suggest that we have him on the email with the partners so that everyone is on the same page for a run up show for the day of when are we gathering, who's saying words, what order are people talking, how long do people want to talk, what does the plan for the day look like, and I'm happy to help coordinate that via email with anyone who wants to work on this.
Good.
I love me a good agenda. Happy to make one. Anything else on Arbor Day?
Oh, let's see.
We can do some final details at our April 1st meeting. I know last time we had some snacks and other things, so we can figure out those details on the 1st.
When can we dedicate 2 or 3 minutes just to talk about part 2 of that? We talked about it in the fall.
Sure.
We had talked about doing some kind of a tree event, right, in the fall, something more directed street related. We got on this list with this organization called 300 Trees. Every year they do 2 major tree giveaways. They get their stock from nurseries, and somebody's funding it. I don't know exactly who or how it gets funded, but anyway, we had talked originally about using some of those trees to plant up around the Horizon View Park area. And then we got clear that the city has plans to do that as remediation for trees that are removed in the new traffic circle. So, but anyway, so I communicated that to them that we probably didn't have any for trees. And they said, well, okay, let's stay on the list. And so anyway, I went down there to where they were giving them, they give away like 2,500 trees, and cars were lined up for blocks and kept coming and coming to pick up their trees. So we didn't register in time. We're on the wait list and went in. They still had quite a few trees. So I picked up 6, 7 trees that I now have at my home, and will keep alive and probably put them in bigger pots. I got 2 shore pines, 2 cascara, and 2 service berry, and then a very small sequoia sprout that somebody was passing out as well. I don't know how they fit in, and they may not fit into our plans at all. I don't know how we would do it, but anyway, we have some trees accumulating. The other thing I did was a few meetings ago, when we were looking more at trees, somebody developed a list. Maybe it was Sam. I think Sam did some research into sources of trees, maybe commercial sources of trees. So I did some phone calling, and I talked to the owner of a company called Big Trees up in Snohomish. Very nice conversation with her, and I was interested in seeing whether she would donate a good sized tree and the planting that goes along with it. And turns out she'd like to do that. And I didn't commit us to do any of that, or I was just kind of seeing if such a thing might be possible. But it might be that there's an interesting thing that could be designed around that. The chance to essentially win a tree. And have it a good size tree, and have it, I mean, by good size, I mean, it's 10, maybe 10 feet, 12 feet, something like that. And have it planted by professional tree planters. So it's just an idea that I was kicking around, and we might think about it sometime in the future, but I could see something like a contest where we have, and they would have a choice probably of 2 or at least 2 different types of trees. And so a resident could decide to write something that we would ask them to write about what tree they would like and where they want to put it, and why they want to do that, and how it's going to be maintained, or what they know about, and then we can have a panel of judges that would include Doug and somebody else, and they would decide which one was the winner, and that person would get this tree.
I see your comment, Minda. I want to just acknowledge that it's there. Larry, I was wondering, and I'm guessing you're the person in the room who would know, if what kind of parameters there are around if a tree is being donated to us with planting services. Is being donated to the tree board or the city to give away, are we allowed to give that away to a random citizen? And are there parameters around how we would need to run a giveaway? I didn't actually get to see it.
That's a good question. I don't really have an answer. I mean, clearly cities are doing these tree giveaways, and so there's a way to make it work. I imagine the idea is that it needs to be open to the public. So if you're gonna like pull a random name out of a hat, that's not really open to the public. So I don't know if that's allowed or not. But if it's, hey, everybody in the city is eligible, first come, first served, that should be totally fine.
I think we've done this before. I won it because I did the ivy out and then I got to choose a tree from like, I think Dick was giving them away. So literally like,
It was like some contest that you won somehow, or?
yeah, the
Yeah.
ivy out contest that the tree board held.
Oh, yeah.
And you had to take a picture of like how much ivy you had removed. Then,
Yeah.
yeah. And that was one of the awards.
It did seem to me that would be something that you'd want to run by city's legal.
Yeah, and I suppose if the idea is Ivy out, it's open to the entire public.
Sure, exactly.
But and everyone in the city is eligible to
Yeah.
participate, and it's a merit-based challenge. I wonder, but yeah, I think just getting clarification as to what, I don't know what the parameters could be.
I know there are lots of legal parameters around things like raffles, so if it was something that is merit-based or something that is like an application-based thing, it's different. If we were looking at doing it as a like, put your name in the hat and we will draw a winner, that becomes much more complex, in my experience.
My thinking is stick to, avoid prizes and just stick to, hey, we have this many trees.
I think we have one.
We have one.
So this is, okay.
One specialty and professional planting. So
Yeah.
there are issues. It's something that needs a lot more research, but it's something I've been kicking around it. And it wouldn't have the benefit of putting a lot of trees in the ground, but it would have the benefit of calling attention to trees. And
You can get a key to the city, why not a tree to the city?
the what?
You can get a key to the city, why not a tree to the city?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we don't run up against any gifts
Yeah, and I'm
issues that the city gifting something to a citizen.
Yes,
I know
the term for that is
Project.
gift of public funds.
That.
And so, yeah, there's strict state laws that the city can use its money, it can donate to nonprofits.
Yeah.
But donating to for-profit businesses or individuals,
If we
Runs
haven't spent
afoul.
any money to buy the tree, if it doesn't cost us anything to give someone a tree, then are we allowed to do it? Those are the questions that I have that I assume would
such
be
tree might
vetted.
never be owned by the city.
Yeah,
It might never.
but we
be
are
owned by the
selecting
city.
someone to give a gift to, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
before you go too much farther with that, you might want to make sure this person is willing to put it in somebody's yard. Because if I was giving away a tree and quite valuable services, tree planting services are not cheap at all. I would want it where everybody could see it, like a park, not necessarily somebody's backyard where nobody could see me doing it. I mean, they would be doing this for publicity for their company.
Yes, it would.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe you've already talked to her, Mark, but my immediate reaction is, oh, it's a great idea. If I'm a company and I can plant a tree in a park with an audience, everybody wins. If I'm a company and I plant a tree in somebody's backyard with only the homeowner, I'm not sure I win as much.
So is this instead something that would serve one of the purposes for one of the planting areas that were identified as a recommendation up at Horizon View, potentially?
Might be another way to go with it, yeah.
Like, I know there's one of the spaces down next to the path that there was space for like one tree. If they would like to make something happen there.
Then the company essentially becomes a contractor for the city. If you get into tree license or, business
Yeah.
license issues and get in. For me, Doug, it wouldn't matter if they wanted to put it in their yard, if somebody really wants a tree and has a good place for it and can write a short couple of paragraphs about.
It depends
Why
on the
we want the
motivation of
tree
the
and why we
donor.
want
That
it.
was what Doug was saying.
Well, the benefit would be the publicity you do for the event beforehand, publicized trees. It wouldn't be a public planting then probably or anything like that.
People have lots of feelings about donations. As someone who has professionally given away free things for 12 years, it's remarkably hard. And their donors are often excited about something in theory, and then when they get to the practicalities of it, it doesn't align with their imagination, and it can get sticky. So I think Doug made a good point that we would want to make sure that they would be okay with if they were picturing you want a tree to put in your city, and they're picturing like outside City Hall, and we're like, great, put it in Stacy's backyard. They may be like, I did not say I was donating a tree to Stacy.
You mean the
company
the
donating it.
big trees?
Yes.
Yeah, and that, the way the kind of discussion was, it would be privately owned tree that somebody would essentially win in this little process.
Yeah, we would just need to make sure that it's whatever we plan is agreeable.
Thinking ahead, I think Mark was alluding to the giveaway in fall. I think what it might be good to put on your agenda for April, assuming the new urban forest planner is attending in April, to at least bring her up to speed that this is something that the tree board wants to do, and kind of what groundwork has been laid in terms of talking to KCD or talking to other cities, and just put it on just so to kind of get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Because I imagine, especially with a new staff member with other duties, just making sure that we don't get to July and then realize, oh, we just don't have enough time to wrap this up.
Yeah. So we do have 6 trees that someone needs to get in the ground somewhere next fall.
Probably so.
And then we've tossed around the idea of a larger giveaway. I suspect that would take a very large amount of work to make happen. And I think it would be heavily dependent on whether KCD has a plug and play program that could connect.
Well, as a matter of fact, these 300 trees people, they will be having another event in the fall. And part of the reason I decided to drive all the way to Bellevue on the chance of picking up a few trees was to meet these people. So I have exchanged emails with them and talked to the person who seemed to be running it. They're going to work closely with 4 cities, and it might be that they would add Lake Forest Park as a 5th city.
That would be awesome.
To provide trees for. I don't know the details, if there would be some cost. If it was a cost, I think it would be a small cost per tree. And I don't know anything about the size of the stock qualifications of the trees, but.
I also want to acknowledge Minda's comment from earlier about doing a plant exchange. I think it would be awesome to potentially partner with somebody like the Water District who already has something there and help publicize it at our tabling events, help get the word out, see if we can partner with them for boosting what is already happening instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. I know they've been excited to partner on things in the past. Alan in particular is very eager to engage with the community and has been excited about working with the tree board as well. So
I didn't realize they have some kind of a plant exchange at the Water District work yard.
Yeah.
Somebody pointed that out to me the other day.
I think it's kind of Alan's pet project.
Yeah. Is it always a bit?
I believe so. I don't know how seasonal it is. I haven't gone to explore it. But
Yeah, it probably is.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, one question is kind of relevant to this. Does anybody know when the planting for all the trees that are being taken will be taken out for BRT is going to happen? How long that's going to take to go through the permitting process? Because that's going to put like several hundred trees into the mix to be planted somewhere around the city. It vastly overwhelms anything we do. I don't know what that's, I don't know if that's going to be 2030, 2038. Now, how long it'll take that process to go on. Larry, do you or Devin have any idea? Sorry. Yancy, have any idea of
No.
how long when that process is likely to actually happen?
I don't know. We don't even have the applications for BRT yet. Yeah, it'll probably go through the urban forest planner.
Okay, so it's likely to be a number of years in the future then before they actually start planting trees to make up for the trees they're taking down.
The
I don't know.
the updates that I've heard from Mark are that Sound Transit, the optimistic schedule is they start submitting permit applications in April. That's assuming that all of their property acquisitions go through smoothly. If there are hiccups with property acquisitions, it probably pushes it to July. That was the latest update I have heard. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the start of submitting permit applications, and the plan would be that Sound Transit would pay money for the city to hire an additional staff to handle this magnitude because, and Yancy, correct me if I'm wrong, the number of permits from Sound Transit is gonna dwarf pretty much all the other permits the city is getting.
Yeah,
And so it's gonna require additional staff to process all those.
Okay.
Going back a step, I think from what I can see with at KCD, they do these giveaways with, they did it with Burien, they did it with Tequila. I don't know if it's to the level of plug and play, but it seems like they have a model that works well. So I would strongly encourage that to be the first step to say, hey, let's, if KCD has a system that, like 80% of the work is done, let's do that.
Agreed.
I can pursue KCD just to do some background and research there. I'm not aware of what kind of a program they have or do, as well as get some more details with 300 trees as to what a program would look like if we were working with them.
Sure. Yeah, I think at the last meeting, Sam was going to talk to his contact at KCD about it, but I assumed that did not happen.
I
So,
think I might have a KCD contact from, when I was chatting.
KCD.
King Conservation. And we have the contact information from the person we were chatting with about the mapping project, correct?
Yeah.
So we can at minimum start there.
Yeah, Mark, I have for these two.
Yeah.
KCD contact.
Arnstein,
But-
her name is Arnstein.
Oh, you have, yeah, Ellen Arnstein.
Ellen
Yeah.
Arnstein.
And Ashley Allen, do you have her?
I don't know that person.
Okay.
You want to pursue it? You want to research with KCD and see what you can learn about that?
Okay. The topic is whether or not they have a tree.
If we wanted to do a tree giveaway in Lake Forest Park, how could they help us?
We know they've done a number of other ones.
Yeah.
Do they have
Perfect.
a model or something that we could plug into?
For sure.
And what does it look like? Right?
Good.
KCD updates, speaking of. I assume no one in this room has any update. Do you?
Well,
A few
Yeah.
updates.
Okay.
So actually, starting with the SFI grant, that has been tabled until the new urban forest planner is on board. Because they will need to make an assessment about what level of work they can commit to and
Yep.
how that fits into the grant. KCD, I think we're still waiting on the KCD board to approve. I think the city's done all it needs to do for like the $4,000 grant. Also happening with KCD, the city, Chris Corwell, who's the surface water manager, or I forget his exact title. But he put a proposal in for rain gardens that's gonna tap into other of the KCD money that's available. And it'll give it's a pilot program where residents, I think it's residents who live near the creeks, can use this to put in rain gardens and other water quality things to help with creek water quality. But those are I don't have anything definitive about the GIS proposal that you approved a few months ago.
well, yeah. I sent a note to Ellen Arnstein. Saying that our understanding was that KCP had everything they needed from us. Was that true? And she said, not sure. She didn't, it was a quick answer. And I just the other day, and I haven't followed up to see any more. It seems like the more direct route would be to ask Mark what he knows about that. And so, unless you want to do that, talking about it, I can give him a call.
Go for it. Yeah,
Because I
last I knew from Sam, it sounded like we had given KCD everything.
sounded like it, didn't it? Yeah. I just want to
Yeah.
confirm that.
Yeah,
So that's what I will try to confirm with
Okay.
Mark what the status of that is. Because Ellen said she didn't think they had it. They do have a signed contract with the city. But there seemed to be some question about whether they actually had the GIS info
Got
to do what we wanted them to do. I meant to make that call to Mark before tonight, but
anything else on grant updates?
well, I do wonder how long it would take the arborist to the new urban planner to figure out how you know how long a hiatus will there be a delay before we can pick up the SFI stuff again? But I can understand coming into a new job and, oh, by the way, there's this fairly significant grant that we're hoping to finalize.
Yep.
So,
I assume that will be a conversation between Christy and Mark. I also don't know. I know our timeline for accepting it was the end of last calendar year.
yeah, they seem to be
and
really flexible
I
about
believe the timeline for spending it, that was the end of this calendar year, if I remember correctly, which is gonna come up with all that.
I'm assuming a lot of that is sliding. They've given us so much leeway in terms of getting the application in that I would take the consider adjusting the delivery date.
We'll see.
Yeah.
So presumably that is something that Christy and Mark will sort out and let us know when they have an answer to. Anything else on grant stuff? Okay, final approval of tree code housekeeping amendments. So my understanding was that all of this, the tree list and the housekeeping stuff and the exceptional tree sizes was all just waiting for somebody for Sam or Sam and Mark to have capacity to take it to council. And council to have capacity to consider it. I assume that that is all now waiting for Christy to have capacity to bring it in front of council. My understanding was we have done everything we need to do with that stuff. Is that correct?
Sort of. There's two aspects. There's the exceptional tree diameters that you did as a board approve.
Ready to go?
And Sam was getting ready to bring that to council when he departed. The second piece are the housekeeping amendments.
That we're going to look at.
And
Okay.
that, it's not in this packet, but if you were to go back to the February packet,
Yes.
those amendments are there. To the new, Kyle and Minda, do you have access to the February agenda? I mean, you could get it through if you Google it, but the public facing site.
Yeah, there, okay, yeah.
Okay, but yeah, I think the idea was if you're comfortable going through those as a board without an urban forest planner present, if you're comfortable approving those, then you could package those changes with the diameter changes, and then those together would be brought forward by Christie once she's ready for it.
And the diameter changes are a part of what we're calling housekeeping amendments.
They are listed in this
Folded
packet.
into that.
Though what you approved, I think it was last summer, also had the more detailed justifications.
Yes.
So I think it's a little messy, but just making it clear that that was previously approved with a detailed justification, and now you're just coming back to some other more minor housekeeping fixes.
Yeah, I don't know how much the justification or the discussion is of the code, even though we approved it, means that we approved this document, but I don't know. I mean, what we have is the old table that would just be pulled out and new table would be put in.
Well, Doug has his hand up.
Yeah. I think I would be leery. Whoops. No, okay. I'd be leery of presenting those just diameter changes to the council as housekeeping changes. Because they aren't. Housekeeping changes is, to me, is saying, oh, we don't really mean the tree list as of February 18th, 1948. We mean the February tree changes as amended.
And
That's a housekeeping change. Changing those diameters and making twice as many trees protected is not housekeeping.
And just to be clear, what I was saying is that
And I'm not sure what you're saying. I'm talking about the presentation of the council, not what you said. Because I think I understood what you said.
So it's a bundle of exceptional tree diameters plus other housekeeping items. So as a board, you already approved the tree diameter part. Now you would be approving the housekeeping items to add on to the exceptional tree diameter substantial changes.
Which is everything in last month's packet. It does include table 1, which is the part A that we have already dealt with, is listed here, but is not what we are necessarily discussing.
Well, I think we've had these so-called housekeeping changes in our hands for a while, haven't we? I don't know if new folks have had a chance to look at those, but I've certainly gone through them line by line, and I think they're pretty nominal, pretty minor changes that are being proposed. I'm happy at this point to move forward with them. I don't know about if Doug, I know you had raised some questions before about context of those changes, wanting to see markup language or markups to those.
Oh yeah, if you're changing something, it's always just easier to see before and after. And Elizabeth sent me the before and after, and I looked through them, and I think it looks great. I think the only substantive change there in the housekeeping is that we're making it explicit that if somebody has an exceptional tree, that they're having to sort of jockey around, to not cut it, then they can build closer to the boundaries of the property than they otherwise would. And this is a carrot Drew wanted to be able to put forward for the stick of protecting these exceptional trees, which I think it's a great idea. The rest of it really is housekeeping. But again, we need to make sure that the tree list goes in along with the same submission to council, which again, to me, that's kind of housekeeping, because it's, we've had professional arborists say these are good ideas, and Dick and I talked with her about it.
And that's where I'm at the end for tree removal for 1614-040. They put in as the recommendation, so twice it references general tree list for Lake Forest Park dated June 22nd, 2023. And then they put in or as otherwise amended. I'm not sure why we're not just taking out the date and saying general tree list for Lake Forest Park. I'm unclear why we would say leave it the way it is and then say as amended.
I wondered about that also.
We should ask our lawyer.
It may be as simple as it's easier to add things than take things away. So we'll just add to it to make it say what we want, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
If I could speak from a council member's perspective, I think we all understand the goal of the language, which is to say, what is the most recent? Yeah,
whatever the most recent.
Yes, whatever the most recent version is, that's what you should be using. And so I think that's not controversial, and so it's just a matter of wordsmithing it to make sure. So I wouldn't let that be a hurdle to you. Council will have an opportunity to make their own amendments to this. But it seems like there's a pretty good understanding that the goal of this is just to say the tree list is a living document.
Yeah. And I was just wondering, for the simplicity of language, instead of continuing to complicate the language in code, do we uncomplicate it by just taking the whole end of the sentence out?
Why don't we send it forward as it is, and then
if
the council thinks it would streamline it by removing it.
That works. Absolutely.
But I had the same thought you did, Doug. I thought the only thing it sounded like it had a little substance to it was that reference to including preserving an exceptional tree as being a reason for amending or modifying some of the lot buffer requirements.
Would it be helpful for me to read that language in case others don't have this in front of them? So this is 16.14.030, paragraph 6. Whenever in the judgment of the planning director, the presence of a viable exceptional tree makes it impractical to locate a building pad on the lot, except by intruding into required setbacks, the planning director may permit a deviation from the front and rear yard zoning setbacks required by this code, in line with the exception criteria in 1616-240. Any discussion about that?
I love it. I'm glad I hope it is accepted because I think that's a great
Yeah.
middle ground to strike.
And if you go to 16.16.240, what it says is there's a cumulative setback that needs to be maintained of 50 feet or something. That means adding up all the way around, I think. And then it also says there can be nothing, the setbacks have to be at least 10 feet, which is probably less than what we require now.
Yeah, I think it's
It's
20
setback
feet in
in
front,
lots.
50 in the back. Well, it depends
Yeah.
on the zoning,
So it varies.
generally it's
Yeah.
20, 15 and.
But it-
Accumulation of 15 on either side.
So anyway,
Seven and a half are fine.
there's established parameters already in the
Yeah.
code for how if an adjustment is necessary, but what still needs to be maintained in terms of setback. So I think that's pretty good step forward. Adds a little more conservation to large trees.
And then if I may flag another item, I think you talked about this, to the definition of general tree list, adding the sentence, this list is amended periodically by the city's qualified arborist in partnership with the tree board based on new arboriculture science and emerging pest and disease issues. So that's essentially the line that says council doesn't have to keep coming back to the tree list. You, as a tree board, plus the urban forest planner, will work together to update it as need be.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any discussion about that?
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, just clarifying the understanding of what the process is great, and then that in partnership with the piece on page 15 that says we get to amend it, and then you have to go by whatever the most recently amended is. Great. Feel like that accomplishes the goal between those two pieces.
Make sure there's information on the tree list that says when and how it was amended and adopted. It's not current. I looked for it recently.
Good to know.
Right, I guess that's staff. But it says it somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, so
I would
wonder-
assume that's the kind of thing that should have a standard footer that says
Yeah,
the most recently edited or amended date.
yeah.
So surprised it doesn't.
I was too.
Well, I'm wondering how much further, how far we are from being able to approve the rest of these.
Oh, I have one more question, 'cause I don't unfortunately have it in front of me. At one point, there were some height restrictions in there that I think we wanted to take out.
I could answer that. This is for the right-of-way tree replantings, that the original version said it had to come from the 15 to 30-foot tree list.
Uh-huh.
That has been stricken out.
Okay, all right, good.
So my understanding is then that it could come from anywhere in the tree list, but the urban forest planner would be involved in saying, hey, you really shouldn't be planting a maple tree under power lines. And so they would be involved in helping to choose what the best trees for any given right of way is. But allowing the flexibility that if it's right of way that's 10 feet away from the street, it's less of an issue how tall the tree gets if it's 20 or 30 feet away from the street.
I think the thing that got that in there in the first place was we were focused so much on the Stride BRT right of way, which is all basically the hill toward the lake. And people wanted to put in the thing, well, let's not put big tall trees, blocking the viewscape there. But this thing applies to any new right of way thing. And then all the right of ways aren't going to be right next to the lake. So I think, again, that's just another reason for taking it out.
Yeah.
If there is consensus in the tree board, it would be appropriate for you to make a motion to adopt these housekeeping changes and then to bundle them with the exceptional tree diameter changes.
Yeah, unless anybody has any reservations, would like to think about it for another month, but I'm certainly ready to move ahead with it.
Would you like to make a motion?
I would. So I would move that we approve the amendments that were done to several sections of the code that we've been calling housekeeping adjustments or amendments. I think that's all we need now.
We have to say, bundle it with exceptional.
Well, I don't.
And recommend to
Is
the
it
arborist, to the urban forest planner to bring it forth to council,
Okay, good.
if you would like.
Yes,
That.
that's exactly what I would like.
I guess I would pose that to Yancy. Is the goal of the tree board clear in this motion to you?
Yeah.
No. Explain it. to me.
So let's have, I would recommend you do two separate motions. So motion number one would be officially recommending the housekeeping changes to the city council. Then motion number two would be bundling the housekeeping changes and the tree diameter changes into a package and requesting that the urban forest planner bring it to council. So does that make more sense then?
Yes.
So let's start, I just start over. So the first motion would be approving the housekeeping changes.
Would anyone like to do that?
It would. Unless you want to, Stacy, you're ready to go.
I'll second you.
Okay, well, I would move then that we as a board approve the housekeeping changes to the code that we've been discussing.
I second that.
All in favor? Any opposed?
And then the second motion would be something along the lines of that you are requesting that the urban forest planner bring both the housekeeping changes and the tree diameter changes together to council.
You gonna make you first?
It's a mouthful, and I'll second it.
Go for it.
I move that the urban forest planner bring the accepted housekeeping change together with the exceptional tree size recommendation to the city council.
Second it.
And did you include in that the tree list? And the tree list.
If we get the housekeeping changes done, then we don't have to go to the council for the tree list. So they can bring it all three together, or we can just get this done and then we.
So just confirming, Yancy, is it clear the sense of what the tree board is motioning now?
They want to bring two things forward to council to our forest planner.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm. In the. Just, yeah. So. Hope I'm not throwing my urban forest planner under the bus before I meet her.
Oh, no, I mean, this motion isn't demanding that it happen next month.
Yeah.
It's basically making
Kinda
it
set-
clear
set-
that these should come to the council as one big package.
Yeah, that's.
Moving to put the ball in their court to move it
Yeah.
forward.
And also, I just want to make sure I'm not overstepping, that I'm just trying to facilitate the procedural side of this. And leave it to you to
Christina.
discuss the contents.
Assuming
Copy
the
that.
urban forest planner thinks all the good changes are.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We've already gone through
Okay.
urban forest.
Yeah.
Planner priors,
Two of them.
two of them.
Okay.
But
Do we have-
I think Victoria's point is really fairly critical there. If we just put this thing forward without the tree list, it's a little bit cleaner, shorter, and we can do the tree list later. So the easier, the better.
Okay. So we have a motion to put the ball in the urban forest planner's court to move the exceptional tree diameters and the housekeeping items through for approval to council. Do I have a second?
I second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, we're good.
Good.
Um,
Yes, it's one of those cases where I think we all understood the goal. It's just how do we Robert's rule our way to achieving the goal?
Yes.
Well, and how will the notes work out? That's,
Yeah.
I just-
You're just done working on it.
And
That's what you've decided.
Yes.
Yes, that's.
And this is also something at the April meeting that you can talk to the urban forest planner about, hey, and this is what we've done at previous meetings.
Yeah.
To explain kind of the lay of the land that she's coming into.
If she has additional questions she wants to bring back to us, she's more than welcome to. But as far as we are concerned, it is well in her court and she is welcome to move it all forward now.
You know, she'd like to talk to anybody in the tree board,
Absolutely.
you know, in the next couple of weeks, I'm sure we'd be happy to arrange it.
We got nothing for new business. Moving to the items that I have listed for the next meeting that I heard tonight. Were finalizing plans for the two events, Arbor Day and Green Fair. Green Fair should just be confirming that people can still make it. Arbor Day finalizing the plans to be able to move towards publicity in April. And then communications, so Minda, Kyle, Mark and I will meet between now and April 1st and bring back our recommendations for education and communication work for this year. Bringing back and discussing fall tree planting. Hopefully making progress towards a game plan there and getting the new urban forest planner on board with whether we want to move forward with something for tree planting and or tree giveaway. Updates on the grants, so seeing if Christy has had a chance by then to get any updates on the KCD grant or any updates on the plans for moving forward with the SFI grant. That's what I got. Anything other people have heard tonight or other things on your mind that we want on the agenda for next meeting?
It's good.
Any other final topics for the good of the order?
I've got one thing just to share, a potential resource for us. There's an arborist who cares for our trees. His name is Oscar Romero. And Minda, I think I've introduced you to him before. But he is, he's awesome. He's very knowledgeable, very passionate about aesthetical pruning and helping the trees. He follows a Japanese pruning technique, the Milwaukee pruning. But I've mentioned to him that I'm a part of the tree board now, and he does a lot of volunteering. I know he helps out with the Secret Gardens tour. He's there with usually one of the sites. You may have met. He's very charismatic and great guy. But so he's mentioned if there's anything that he might be able to help us with sometime, like he's an expert in it, so he'd be happy to. So just wanted to put that out there in case there anything ever comes up where we might be able to leverage that.
Awesome. Yeah. Great to have those resources. Anything else? Would anyone like to move to adjourn?
Oh, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
I
think we're done for the night. Thank you all.
thank you.
And thank you for your support this evening, Nancy.
Yeah.
Appreciate you stepping in.
Thank you for coming.
See you guys.